Well, it's already.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Mamagonian. I'm the Director of Academic Affairs at the National Association for Armenian Studies and Research, NASAR. And on behalf of NASAR and the Society for Armenian Studies, the co-sponsors of today's program, I welcome you. And I would like to just say a few words of introduction before handing the program over to our two distinguished speakers. This is a significant occasion as it marks the publication of a major new work, Bedross Der Matossian, The Horrors of Adana, Revolution and Violence in the Early 20th Century, just issued last month by Stanford University Press. And we will hear from Dr. Der Matossian as well as his interlocutor or discussant, whichever is the better term, another distinguished scholar, Dr. Uğur Ümit Üngör. Dr. Bedross Der Matossian is the Vice Chair and Associate Professor of Modern Middle East History and the Hymen Rosenberg Professor in Judaic Studies at the Department of History at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. Born and raised in East Jerusalem, Bedross is a graduate of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He completed his PhD in Middle East History at Columbia University in 2008. He has taught at MIT and at the University of Chicago, and he is the current president of the Society for Armenian Studies, and I would add also a valued member of the NASAR Academic Advisory Committee and Board. He is the author of the award-winning book, Shattered Dreams of Revolution, From Liberty to Violence in the Late Ottoman Empire, published by Stanford University Press in 2014, and is the editor or co-editor of multiple books, including The First Republic of Armenia on its centenary, Politics, Gender, and Diplomacy, the press at California State University, Fresno, 2020, and the forthcoming Denial of Genocides in the 21st Century, University of Nebraska Press, 2022. Dr. Uğur Ümit Üngör is Professor of Holocaust and Genocide Studies at the University of Amsterdam and the NIOD Institute in Amsterdam. His main area of interest is the history and sociology of mass violence, with a particular focus on the modern and contemporary Middle East, and he has published books and articles on various aspects and cases of mass violence, including The Making of Modern Turkey, Nation and State in Eastern Anatolia, 1913 to 1950, Oxford University Press, 2011. Paramilitarism, Mass Violence in the Shadow of the State, Oxford, 2020. And the just published Syrian Gulag, Assad's Prison System, 1970 to 2020. I will now step back and ask Doctors Der Matossian and Üngör to carry the program forward. Gentlemen.
Thank you very much, Mark. Sorry, my voice is gone. I'm feeling under the weather. Thank you for the Society for Armenian Studies and National Association for Armenian Studies and Research for co-hosting this event. Thank you for Mark and Uğur for agreeing to, Mark for introducing and Uğur for being the discussant for this event. Thank you for Laura Yardumian too for her PR work. I'm not going to give a formal talk today. I'm just going to discuss about the book. The first issue is, why did I write this book? I wrote this book due to a few reasons. One of them has to do with the fact that the Adana massacres usually are not mentioned in Ottoman and Turkish studies history books and modern Middle East studies history books. The Hamidi massacres are mentioned, but the Adana massacres are not mentioned. Second, most of the concentration on the mass violence inflicted on the Armenians of the Ottoman Empire tend to concentrate on the Armenian genocide, and earlier phases of violence do not take equal space. Adana massacres, and let alone the Hamidi massacres, which is an area that needs to more exploration. Third, it has to do with the fact that historians until today view the Adana massacres as a rehearsal, as a dress rehearsal to the Armenian genocide, which I disagree with. I do not adhere to the continuum approach to understanding the mass violence inflicted upon the Armenians of the Ottoman Empire. By the continuum approach, we understand that the earlier phases of violence culminated in the Armenian genocide. I say that, I argue that each phase of violence should be discussed separately as a distinct phase, trying to understand its particularities, its commonalities and differences between different phases of violence, but also to compare them with different phases of violence that other ethnic groups have experienced in the Ottoman Empire, and putting all of these both on the regional and global levels. And that's what I do towards the end of my book. I do compare the Adana massacres with other two waves of violences, two different geographic areas. Those are the Odessa massacres of 1905, the Jewish pogroms of 1905, and the Sikh massacres of 1984. Of course, there are many other cases of violence that could be compared to the Adana massacres, but I only chose these two just to show the way in which structures of violence, the key players, the actors are the same in all other cases of genocide, despite the fact that we are talking about different phases of violence. And fourth, it has to do with the fact that I try to analyze the Adana massacres from a more social scientific perspective. Massacres themselves are such a complex phenomenon that it's not sufficient to look at it from only the perspective of history. We need other perspectives, social scientific perspective, such as sociology, anthropology, political science, and so on, in order to understand the complexity of massacres. But also, I try to bring a novelty to the field, which is approaching the Adana massacres by not essentialization, by not essentializing this as Armenian versus Turks, as Armenians versus Muslims. The real question I think we need to ask is how and why rationalized society suddenly erupts in a cataclysmic wave of violence against the other, in this case, an Armenian. I mean, Armenians and Muslims or Turks to that extent were living in close areas as neighbors, but the question that we need to ask is why suddenly they erupt and initiate massacres. So that's a very complex thing, and it's not sufficient to only discuss this in the coming 15 minutes, but I'll try to provide some background about the massacres. So the book is divided into 8 chapters. In the first chapter, I provide a historic background of the Adana massacres, but of Adana in general. Try to understand what are the major socioeconomic and political transformations that took place in the beginning of the 19th century. And I distinguish 5 transformations. These are administrative reforms, economic development, sedentarization and pacification of roaming tribes, the influx of refugees resulting in population growth and settling them in Armenian populated areas, thus creating the competition over resources or niche overlap approach, and finally changes in the land codes, specifically with the in the context of the Tanzimat massacres, which is the 1858 land codes. Now, in order to understand the massacres, we have to understand the key concept of rumors. Rumors played an important role in these massacres. So basically, until the Young Turk Revolution of 1908, when Hamidian regime was ruling the region of Adana and Cilicia, condition of Armenians were much better than the Young Turk period. Armenians did not suffer any massacres in Adana during the Hamidian regime, but there were a lot of contentious intense relationship between the Armenians and the Muslims. But the Wali of Adana, the governor Bahri Pasha, was in very good terms with the Armenians, and this is due to his close connections with the Bishop Musher Seropian. I'm just going to now share my screen with you in order to show you some images. Okay. Can you see the...
Yes, we see.
Can you see this one, Mark?
Yes. It's not changing, but we see the slide.
Okay. So this is the map of Adana.
No, we don't see that, Bedross. Sorry.
Okay, sorry.
It says family spinning cotton.
Okay, now, all right. This is the map of Adana. You can see it now, yeah?
Yes.
So it's important to understand the map of Adana and the division of the province. And as I said, in the 19th century, one of the most important economic transformation is that Adana becomes a hub for cotton production. And basically every year, about 100 to 120,000 migrant workers will come from different areas to Adana in order to work in the cotton fields. So you have a major transformation that's happening. But towards the end of the 19th century, you have economic tensions rising in Adana as the new modes of production are changing. Armenians becoming the head of factories. They're importing new machineries from different parts of the world, specifically United States and Britain, in order to facilitate and in order to expedite the cotton production. And this does not sit well with the migrant workers, with the Muslim migrant workers, whose daily lives are based on the cotton production. So you have economic problems. Then you have administrative problems lying in the sense of populations being intentionally resettled in areas where Armenians were a kind of majority, just thus creating a major competition and major tensions. So one important thing that we have to also understand that Adana is the place where the Armenian Kingdom of Cilicia existed in the from 1198 to 1375. This historic importance is going to play a major role during the Adana massacres. So to make a long story short, this is Bishop Musher Seropian, the most important leader of Adana. He's the primate of Adana who played an important role in advancing and developing the Armenians in the region.
Bedross, we're still only seeing the first map. Sorry.
This is the map of the Cilician Kingdom. And Cilician Kingdom starts in 1198 and ends in 1375. And this is Bishop Musher Seropian, the most important figure, played a dominant role in advancing Adana economically, politically, socially, and religiously. And one important thing that we have to remember is that, as I said, during the Hamidian period, despite the fact that there is a major wave of massacres taking place in the eastern provinces, Adana does not suffer that massacres. And that's due to the cordial relationship between Bishop Musher and the Wali of Adana, Bahri Pasha. But rumors play an important role in the intensification of the tensions between Armenians and others. These rumors are based on the following allegation: that the Armenian revolutionaries are working very hard in Adana in order to bring about the establishment and the erection of the Kingdom of Cilicia. And Bishop Musher was going to become the king of that new Kingdom of Cilicia. So what happens these are just images of cottons indicating how important the cotton production is for the Adana economically. Cotton was also called the white gold, Ak Altın, white gold, and it played a dominant role not only in Adana's economy, but regionally, specifically after the American Civil War, where the concentration started going towards the Middle East, Egypt, and Adana and Izmir, but also cotton played an important role in bloodshed. I can explain that later. But the Young Turk Revolution would become a turning point in the history of the region, not only that of Adana, but other places. And the Young Turk Revolution will open Pandora's box of existing tensions within the region. And now Armenians, Muslims, everyone now thinks about this new phase. Euphoria of the revolution starts, and something that I have discussed in my first book. But we immediately see an intensification of tensions within the region of Adana. Basically, now you have the people of the ancien regime who benefited from Abdul Hamid, and the people of the CUP who are now the rulers of the political system within Adana, and you have the Armenians. So eventually, all of this would lead to major tension within Adana. Rumors that spread in the pre-revolutionary period that Armenians are going to revolt in order to establish the kingdom of Adana suddenly erupts in the post-revolutionary period, where Armenians start buying weapons, Muslims start buying weapons, Armenians start express their cultural nationalism in terms of odes, processions, theatrical presentations, but also in terms of discussing about the political future of the region, whether they want decentralization or centralization. But all of this sends the wrong signals to the Muslim or the Young Turk or even the notable leadership in Adana, that Armenians are indeed preparing for an uprising in order to establish the Kingdom of Cilicia. Now, Armenians were buying weapons, yes, with great amount, but their understanding of buying weapons was only for self-defense purposes. And I did a lot of research in the Dashnak archives, in documents that haven't seen the day of light today, that indeed there was the ideology was to buy weapons in order to prevent the counter-revolutionaries to come into power. What if the counter-revolutionaries came to power? We would see another bloodshed. But few important things that trigger the Adana massacres, it has to do with the counter-revolution that starts on April 13, 1909, which old calendar is March 31, and the Adana massacres start in April 14 and last for 3 days. This is an image of the celebration of the constitution. Again, everyone was celebrating the constitution, Armenians, Arabs, Jews, in Adana, everyone was hugging each other. And it was the euphoria of the revolution. And I argue that the real litmus test of the brotherhood or liberty and fraternity or equality really starts after the fading of the euphoric feelings. So Armenians were carrying coats of arms pertaining to the Cilician kingdom. This is one of the coat of arms. It's called Nishank, Lusinyats Takavorats, the emblem of the Lusinian kings or kingdom. And there are two phases of the massacres in Adana. One of them starts, as I said, in April 14 and lasts for 3 days, where Armenians put a very strong resistance. Muslims kill Armenians, but Armenians also kill those Muslims who were attacking them. And there's a phase of peace until April 25, where the new battalions arrive from Rumelia to Adana in order to restore peace. And this phase in between the two massacres is essential, because that's where now the prophecy, quote unquote, the prophecy that Armenians were really planning an uprising in Adana solidifies in writing with this Young Turk paper called I'tidal here, specifically this article, Mudhesh Bir Hisyan, an astonishing uprising, which now Ihsan Fikri, the editor, Burhan Nuri, and many other Young Turk leaders emphasize and assert the allegations and confirm, quote unquote, the prophecy that Armenians really tried to erect the Cilician kingdom and they failed of doing that. And this, instead of restricting the public sphere in Adana, after the first wave of massacres, Irtidal was distributed freely to the masses, and now the masses, seeing in written that the prophecy is really proved now in written form, that the Armenians were initiating a failed uprising to erect the Cilician kingdom. And eventually this leads to the second wave of massacres, which leads to more killing with Adana. The Adana massacres do not only happen in the region, in the city of Adana. Massacres do happen in urban areas, but they spread. It spread into different parts here to the Sanjak of Mersin, Silifke, Sanjak of Adana, of course, Kozan, Jabal Barakat. So the worst places of the massacres, but it also poured to different parts of the province of Aleppo here, to Antakya, Iskenderun, and many other places. The government was not able to control. It was complicit, the local government. CUP members were complicit, the local government was complicit. But again, like other phases of humanitarian intervention, there was no humanitarian intervention by the European powers to aid the Armenians. I'm going to define in a second the humanitarian intervention, but there was humanitarian aid, both by the Armenians themselves, by the Ottomans, by the Europeans, by the Americans, who tried to alleviate the suffering of the Armenians. Of course, when in the post-Adana massacre period, there are two inquiry commissions sent to Adana. One of them is the Parliamentary Investigation Commission, led by the Armenian Hagop Babigyan, and the second one is the government-led commission, led by Harutyun Mostichyan and Faik Bey. And eventually, they come up with the government one comes up with its own assessment as to what happened. But Babigyan, who goes there and writes a lengthy report, returns back, and prior to his testimony in the parliament, 3 days prior to his testimony, he dies in mysterious circumstances. I can discuss that later. There were 3 military tribunals in Adana. One of them was local, which was formed by local notables, some of them complicit in the massacres, that they immediately blamed the Armenians for the uprising, and again, reasserting the prophecy that Armenians revolted in order to establish the Kingdom of Cilicia. Armenians complain about this, that it is injustice what's happening in Adana. The government sends a second military tribunal under the presidency of Kenan Bey. And Kenan Bey comes and does not start new investigation. He takes over the material that was prepared by the first military tribunal, and then eventually he finds Armenians too, responsible. And Hagop Babigyan himself plays an important role to abort the injustice that took place in Adana, complains about it, and eventually the government now sends a third military tribunal led by Fazıl Pasha, and eventually about 30 Muslims and 6 Armenians were hanged, delivered the capital punishment, and about 20 Armenians were imprisoned, as opposed to about 300 Muslims were imprisoned. Justice in Adana was not achieved, I should say. It was achieved nominally, because even those real culprits who played an important role in the massacres received minimal prosecution, or minimal sentences. These minimal sentences were either 1 or 2 months in prison, or banishing or being exiled to 1 or 2 years. The most important culprits in the Adana massacres were the Vali, Javad Bey, the commander-in-chief, the editor of Itidal and his co-editors, Ihsan Fikri, Burhan Nouri, Nurhan Buri, and also the few of the notables who played an important role. So the themes that I try to analyze the massacres are public spheres. I tried to demonstrate from social scientific perspective as to why the public spheres become a contentious place, not only for the enactment of identities, because prior to the 1908 revolution, public spheres were really suppressed. And after the Young Turk Revolution, now suddenly public spheres are open. And those subaltern public spheres, which I call Armenians, now become on an equal level and act in an equal level with the others, the dominant groups. So it doesn't become only a sphere for enactment of identities, but also a sphere for violence and intensification of ethnic tensions due to the cultural nationalism of Armenians. Second, rumors. We know that rumors play an important role in all massacres. Rumors are very dangerous. They solidify ethnic boundaries and immediately creating a contentious situation. Rumors are based on allegations. No one who is part of that mob will not even go and say, what if these rumors are wrong? They immediately believe in the rumors, and eventually rumors play an important role in the escalation of violence. Third are emotions. Emotion-based analysis of ethnic conflicts remains in its infancy, let alone in the case of the Ottoman Empire. Emotions are really important to understand the emotions. By saying emotions, I don't mean that we need to justify that, say, you know, they were feeling bad, that's why they've done it. But as social scientists, as historians, we need to understand the emotions, the anger of the Muslims, not only political anger, but also economic anger towards the Armenians, because during the Adana massacres, it's not only that they killed the male, it was gendered massacres, by the way. They did not only kill the Armenian male, but the attack was also an attack on the tools of modernity, as most of the machinery of cotton production and other tools were destroyed. Factories were burned by the local population. And finally, humanitarianism and humanitarian intervention. Humanitarian intervention did not take place. The understanding of humanitarian intervention is that Europeans interfered in the internal affairs of the Ottoman Empire when they saw that massacres were taking place. This intervention took place in order to stop the massacres, or in order to relieve the situation and stop the perpetration of further massacres. It took place in the case of Greece, in the case of Crete, in the case of Lebanon, but not in the case of Armenians, be it in the Armenian genocide, be it in the Hamidian massacres, or be it in the Adana massacres. And there is a lot of material on humanitarian intervention written by Wotempo, Davide Rodogno, and Michel Toussaint. So towards the end, the aim of this project is to situate the Adana massacres in a larger discussion that goes beyond Armenian history or beyond Ottoman history, kind of put it in the context of study of culture, study of massacres. I mean, massacre studies in itself is a new field. We have genocide studies, but we have massacre studies, and try to understand it from non-Armenian perspective, non-Ottoman perspective, as a crime that happened, a crime against humanity that happened during a contentious period. And usually massacres are triggered by a specific event. For example, in the case of the Sikh massacres, it started with the assassination of Indira Gandhi by her 2 Sikh bodyguards. In the case of the Odessa massacre, it started due to the 1905 revolution, and so on. So the idea here is to present an important case study for the general readers, but also for the general academic audience, in order to see what transpired in the case of Adana. Thank you very much. Or it's your turn.
Yes, thank you very much, Bedross, and thank you for this invitation. Can everybody hear me well?
Okay, so sorry, Uğur, just a second. This is Hagop Babigyan, the prominent parliamentary member who was sent by the parliament in order to investigate the massacres. And these are some scenes of the destruction. The whole city was destroyed, actually. And as a matter of fact, we have more photographs from the Adana massacres than from the Armenian genocide. Sorry, Uğur, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Bedross. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I'm just going to...
Great.
Yes.
Okay. Well, first and foremost, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure here to speak about this book, which has been long in the making, of course, really long. I remember in 2010 when I visited Nebraska, we spoke about this book when it was still in gestation, and I'm really happy that it's out now. It's really a fantastic book. Congratulations, Bedross, on working on this for so long and so exhaustively. It is really the kind of the definitive book for now, basically on this massacre, and on a number of issues beyond. Now, of course, we're all here among friends, but that's exactly why we're going to be brutally honest without being brutal in discussing this book and discussing the issues relevant to it. So myself and I've traveled quite a bit in eastern provinces of Turkey, and some of my inspiration for research I actually got from these travels. I spent a little bit of time, for example, in Sis, Kozan, and I went once a long time ago to the city of Adana, and it was in the summer, and that immediately kind of put me off from Adana, because it was really at some point it was the hottest summer in the region for like 15 years. And the rubber on my shoes started melting, and then I thought, no, I'm not coming back here anymore. Definitely not going to do research on this region. So I basically never returned ever since. I stuck to Diyarbakir, which is dry heat. Now, although of course we did work a little bit on kind of historical sources in the confiscation book, right? So the one chapter on Adana there. Now I have one question on the book, one question on the field, and one question on the relevance, the broader relevance of the scholarship. So let me, and I won't take too much of your time because we want to go to Q&A and some questions already rolling in. So let me start with the book. Now, had this been, yet another work on the burning of Smyrna, for example, or on the occupation of Istanbul, and I think that I would have hesitated actually to give this book the fully positive endorsement recommendation for everybody to read. Because those topics, Smyrna and Istanbul, they've been covered and treated very thoroughly. And I also firmly believe that they have hit, those regions and those topics have hit a bit of a dead end in the scholarship. And this is one of the reasons why, for example, I've stepped back just a little bit to see what type of research was forthcoming in the past few years. The Adana massacre, on the other hand, of course, has not only been understudied, but also the existing research on it. It lacks the kind of fine-grained detail and the rich human landscape that this book offers. So far, we would have, for example, general books, and some of the major characters were in there, right? Babikyan would be in there. The kind of investigative reports that would be discussed. But what I really like about this book is that, of course, Bedross has a kind of trademark multidimensional research, which he looks at the massacre from the perspective of different presses, for example, or the communities. And that's exactly what this wretched episode needed, of course. And I was happy that you took up the challenge. Now, just like in the Armenian genocide only 6 years later, the nationalist historiographies that came later, of course, on a number of sites, they constructed that genocide exclusively in terms of a kind of binary cleavage between Turks and Armenians, even though the category of Turks actually didn't even exist yet, to be honest, because not only did a lot of the perpetrators not to call themselves Turks, but also it is as a concept, the nation building only was like sufficiently proceeded only in the 1930s and 40s, and according to most recent research, really into the 60s and 70s. And the same thing we can actually argue for Armenians, right? So this is also a kind of nation building process that receives a bloody, of course, but unmistakable boost with the genocide, right? Now, to portray, for example, both the genocide but also this massacre, in terms of that all the perpetrators were Turks, quote unquote, and all the victims were Armenians, it is something that you complicate in this book, right? So we have a wide range of specific communities, also sub-communities. So not just, for example, Fellahin or not just Circassians, but there are particular communities of Circassians. And there is also, of course, a number of Syriacs, of Assyrian Christians who become victims of the genocide. So I was wondering whether you could talk a bit about that cleavage, about how did this become later such a kind of binary, was constructed historically as a binary, and also how do we explain that this also Syriacs became victims in this massacre, because that is important, I think, for 6 years later when we see it return.
Yeah, I mean, there are different. Yes, go ahead. Sorry.
Maybe it's better if I just finished it and then you can just respond to all of it. So second question on the book is the relative absence of class as an analytical category. Right, I actually searched. I searched in the ebook version, and you mentioned it like 6 times, I think, 5 or 6 times. But we know that from massacre research, whether that's the examples that you gave, or it can be a wide range of other massacres inside broader genocide or way outside as standalone massacres. That massacres, they say often just as much about intra-ethnic relations as they say about inter-ethnic relations, right? So, and I'll give you, for example, page 21, you talk about dissatisfied class. Page 103, you talk about the working class mob. Page 140, you talk about working class and poor. So these are only like 2 or 3 references in the whole book. And I was wondering whether you could talk about a little bit more about not only the attack on modernity, but also the relevance of class and violence as a form of social mobility. But what did it mean for these working class people in the way they imagined themselves within a broader Muslim community that the massacre did for them? Then a question about the field. We talked about the field quite a bit, Bedross, over the years. It is a vibrant field. I think, late Ottoman violence, mass violence, massacres against the Armenians, the genocide itself, of course. And I think that, you've done a terrific job of the kind of massive Ottoman archival sources. And I'm happy you didn't write this book like you finished it 10 years ago. Because in the past 10 years, a lot of other materials came up, the Ottoman archives. You've used all of those materials, and also never before seen Armenian memoirs. I think that's a real challenge to make all these sources work together. And that's really, you pull that off with flair. For example, for me, if you ask me, if anybody would say to me, if you only have 30 seconds to read anything from this book, what would you read? Then I would say they should read the section on the Telan farm conflict. That for me was really kind of the core of the thing. And you could almost make that like a vignette, if you had to tweet something, I would tweet that section. It's really brilliant because it unites different levels of analysis, not just the central government, but the governor, the city, and also the farm level. So I think that was really wonderfully done. Now, when it comes to continuity, now my question is going to be my first question on the field. The continuity not deterministically, like Dadrian did, So there's basically everything that came before 1915 was automatically and eminently teleologically going to lead to the genocide. Not in that way, but in the broader Young Turk period. And of course, that I looked at the period 1913, 1950. But if we stretch that 1913 a little bit, we include the Adana massacre, then there are a number of interesting continuities there. And I was wondering whether you could say a few things about it. For example, so we have this massacre in 1909, and we have for example, the large massacre against Kurds in 1925, against Kurds, Armenians, and Assyrians, actually, in Diyarbakir, and the Sheikh Said uprising. And this notion of imagined uprising, and I think that's a really important concept. And there's an imagination, a fantasy of an uprising, and there's kind of categorical violence against civilians. That's something that, that is also very characteristic for the 1925 episode. So, and is that a coincidence or not? Well, obviously not, but how is it not? Because there are only 16 years in between these two episodes. So what is the year 2006 to us right now? For those people in 1925, the Adana massacre is only 16 years ago. And then, of course, most kind of area studies fields, they rely heavily on local archives, right? So anybody who wants to work on French history obviously has to go to local archives, like some village or a commune or the city level. Think, for example, of Timothy Snyder's first academic book, one of his first, The Reconstruction of Nations. Now, why was that book so famous, and why was it so good? Because he made a rich use of local archives. He really traveled to these small towns that no historian in Poland ever thought of actually going to, because everybody stays in Warsaw and does research in the national archives. And he collected these small provincial and small urban archives. Now, my question to you is, how useful or what did we use from any of the local archives? And if nothing, if you could have access to it, what would you be interested in, right? Because it's really bizarre that in this vast empire that you don't have to go to Adana, in fact, at all. You don't have to at all go to Adana to do any research on the Adana massacre. And that's a little strange, for example. That wouldn't be the case in French history or Polish history. And then finally, of course, about the field. So you wrote a book about the revolution, and then you have the massacre, 1909. So my question is, of course, is what's next for you? Is this like a trilogy, like Aniolo, for example, did? And maybe you could talk about that a bit. And the final question is a bit more theoretical. Now, this book is also eminently intersectional, right? So it looks at not only as historians of the Ottoman Empire, but also scholars on the microdynamics of mass violence. And you do that really well in bringing that together. And that even if nobody is an expert, somebody is not an expert on the late Ottoman Empire, they still should read it because you get a sense of the dynamics, the microdynamics of violence. So it would also reach a wide audience as an example of how to, and of course, relatively vaguely defined ethnic communities gradually through violence can turn on each other after having lived fairly peacefully, even if uneasily. Right? It's an uneasy coexistence, sometimes even hostile coexistence, is the norm across the world in ethnic coexistence. But why does it become violent in a short period of time? So think of the remarkable study by Max Bergholz, right? Violence as a generative force. I mean, this guy looks at one Bosnian village in a period of 50, 60 years, right? So, but he has much more to say about that village than just what happened there in terms of just empirical, no, not at all. Or think about Mary Fulbrook, for example, a small town near Auschwitz, right? The book that looks at, literally a small town near Auschwitz, and then tries to look at the kind of global microhistory of these small areas. So what does the Adana massacre teach us about the state of the world, really? And what can we learn about it if we compare it with these other books, for example, Bergholz or many other books that try to do the same? And what do you think the field should be doing in the coming years? Okay, we have obviously a lot more to say, but we'll leave it at this for now, and I'm sure other people will have questions as well. Thank you, and again, congratulations.
Thank you, Uğur. So I'll start with the first one, regarding the Christian. Of course, the Christians were killed too, specifically Syriacs, some Greeks too, old Chaldeans, old Syriacs, some Chaldeans too, but the majority were Armenians. I don't want to enter into the category of Muslim versus Christian because that obfuscates, our understanding of this conflict. I mean, due to the fact that religion might have played some role, but it wasn't the dominant role. And I even did not mention here the form, the composition of the mob itself. It's not kind of everyone is rallying under the flag of Islam. You have people who are, this for them is an important opportunity for material gain, suddenly able to material gain to get from the massacres as much as they can by looting Armenian properties. So the mob is composed of irregular troops, bashubozuks, chatas, migrant workers, some criminals. We cannot, the problem is categorization. What do you call this group? Do you call them Muslims? You call them Turks? Are they Turks? Are they Circassians? So it's a complex situation, but we need to have a kind of way of trying to categorize them, and that's why I do not fall into the category of this was Christian versus Muslim thing, like Benny Morris and Dror Ze'evi do actually, trying to represent this continuum as one, Islam versus Christianity. What was your second question, Uğur? I have so many questions here.
One second, Bedross. I'm just getting my notes again.
I can continue regarding class.
Yes, and the
of course,
class is the most important.
Class is plays an important role. One thing we have to remember in the Adana case is that tensions were not usually between local people. They were usually between landowners, such as notables, who had a lot to benefit from the Hamidian regimes. For example, in the book, I discussed the first chapter about key figures who played a dominant role in this ethno-religious tensions. And these are Garabet Gökderelian, for example, who was a large landowner. He was a lawyer, and he had serious issues with Abdul Qadir Baghdadizadeh and other major notable and landowners. So you see these notables are kind of tension of notables, which after the Young Revolution would be notables of the ancien regime versus the CUP, and Armenians are in the middle, okay? But the real question we have to ask, as until March of 1909, Armenians were in the middle. They were neither with the CUP nor with the local government, who was representative of the ancien regime with his acolytes, were notables. But the real question we have to ask, why both of them turn against Armenians too, all right? So we have multiple classes playing a role here. You have the notable class, the landowner class, who plays also important role as disseminator of rumors, specifically the role of agents provocateurs, trying to mobilize the mobs, Circassians, Muslims, Circassians, migrant workers, migrant workers, Circassians, local people, in order to convince them that the Armenians have a larger intention here, more sinister aims to get rid of the Armenians. And another thing that you've raised is about voices. In the book, I give voice both to the perpetrator and the victim and the bystanders. So, if the Muslim says, for example, the Armenians killed us, they massacred us, I mentioned that because it provides an important insight as to what they were thinking about, what they were genuinely thinking about. Another thing is that do you hide information that you come across? If, for example, I found material that said that Armenians, we were preparing to initiate an uprising, it didn't work, I have to mention that as a historian, because first of all, I'm a historian, human being, and then a historian. But I never came across that. For example, there were always kind of rumors that the bishop of Adana, Mushekh Seropyan, was a Hunchak member. I said maybe that's an exaggeration, but looking into his unpublished memoirs, he actually says I'm a Hunchak member, revolutionary. And that's why he was under the magnifying glass of the central government. But then he had problems with the Hunchaks and then leaves them. And then there are also intra-Armenian tensions. For example, Garabet Gökçerelyan, the famous landowner and revolutionary, who becomes a very, very dangerous figure for the Muslim population as the one who is, and they even write in cables, actually. They say, you know, the Mufti of Bahçe, for example, and or the sub-governor of Bahçe, for example. He says that Garabet Gökçerelyan is coming with 12,000 Armenians on horses. You know, that's not true. It's a lie. But Garabet Gökçerelyan and himself and Musher, they had serious problems with each other. They really hated each other. So again, you have here also intra-Armenian ethnic tensions between the Dashnaks, Hunchaks, Ramgavars. And of course, for the Dashnaks, for example, 1908 revolution would become an important period for their spreading their influence in the region of Cilicia, because Cilicia was under the kind of influence of the Hunchaks at the time. So going back to continue, you're right. The only thing that connects all of these phases is impunity, actually, you know, impunity. But in terms of key players, in terms of ways of thinking, I don't think that there was a grandiose ideology in the Adana massacres to get rid of the Armenians. There were interest groups who wanted the massacres to take place, but it wasn't centrally planned. That's my own approach. Other Armenian scholars would say that the CUP had a role in it. The local CUP had a role in it. But one thing is important, is the level of tension that existed in the region of Anatolia towards the end of 19th century or towards the beginning of 20th century, where minor or major trigger would lead to a cataclysmic violence within these communities. And if the 1909 trigger was the counter-revolution, World War I was the World War I. So the Armenian genocide was World War I, and the imaginary internal Armenian enemy who is going to kill us and erect an Armenian independent republic in the region of Anatolia. So the next project would be the Balkan Wars of 1912-1913. Hopefully, it would be part of the trilogy before World War I, trying to examine again the way in which these non-dominant groups would be similar to the first project. Armenians, Arabs, Jews, Albanians, try to understand their response to the Balkan Wars and the reaction of the central government. Is it true that the CUP lost faith in the Armenians and other groups during the first Balkan Wars? Did Armenians really, really started thinking and talking about independence? And what for the future, I think we need more case studies as such, but not in terms of looking into them from the perspective of that region only, trying to ask larger questions, not only larger questions about the history, but about the thematic approach. Try to understand how others have approached mass violence in different parts of the world, in different regions of the world. I always tell my students, if you want to understand more about your field, read about the same book in a different field, in different geographic area, in a different setting. It could give you more information about how to approach the field. And I'm not sure if I answered all of your questions, but I'd like to open it for discussion for the others who have questions. Thank you, Uğur.
Thank you both. Let me rejoin here and ask some of these questions. And I want to ask one question myself, actually, Bedross, that continues to poke at the much vexed continuity question. So early in the book, you say that you established that you do not see it as part of a continuum leading to the Armenian genocide, but as an outgrowth of the ethno-religious violence that was inflicted on the region in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Can you explain to me the distinction that's being made there? Because to me, it almost sounds like two ways of saying the same thing.
No, what I mean is that this is not here's the thing, people will I mean, people who argue about who try to explain the Armenian genocide, they'll say that, Armenians were under the ruthless rule of the Ottomans for 500 years. That's a nationalist approach. But the real question we have to ask ourselves as to why in the end of the 19th century, periods of mass violence starts towards other groups, okay? More systematic way. The Hamidian massacres, and the argument for the continuity, like Dadarian would say, there is a culture of massacre in which Islam plays an important role. If we're going to pursue that approach, we'd say, okay, you know what? This started in the Hamidian massacre and ended with the Armenian genocide, like Dror Zeevi and Benny Morris say. And the only theme that connected all of these is Islam and anti-Christian view. I argue that this is not the same. We have to discuss the Hamidian massacres in the larger context of waves of massacres taking place in the end of the 19th century or after the second of the 19th century. The Armenians are not alone. You have the Damascus massacre, Lebanese civil war. You have Crete. You have even earlier that the Greece war of independence. So you have other things that are happening at the same time. That's what I'm thinking when I say that this should not be viewed as a separate event that only happens in the realm of the 19th century. Because similar things do happen, like the Adana massacres. There are other massacres that took place, and we have to understand why and how these massacres take place or took place.
Question from Armin Manu Kaloyan. How do you account for the death toll of the massacres in Adana? If we are to accept the figures, which are in the range of 15 to 20,000 dead, that is an absolutely astonishing number of deaths for such a short span of time, and in the absence of technology capable of inflicting such mass casualties. First, are the numbers, which I believe are the more or less traditional numbers, reliable? And if they are, how does one account for such large numbers in such a short span?
Of course, numbers are very problematic. Someone would say 30,000, other would say 12,000. I'm following Babigyan's report, which says 20,000 Armenians were killed. But we will never know the real figures due to the fact that there were thousands of migrant workers who were killed at the time. And these migrant workers came from different provinces. Both Muslims and Armenians who came from different provinces and worked in Adana, okay? So the numbers the Ottoman figures would say 6,000 Armenians were killed, all right? But you have the investigation commission and Babigyan comes and assesses the situation, and he says, in an interview when he returns back, I think he says more than 20,000 were killed. As in terms of the killing modes, bullets, I should say, counted bullets and blunt instruments, because I do mention in my book about the modes of killing that took place, about the instruments of killing. As I said, after 1908, there are major businesses, Armenians selling weapons, Muslims selling weapons, everyone is buying weapons, and even I found kind of documents, letters sent to the American consul or vice consul in Mersin from the United States, companies, weapon producing companies, producing him, presenting him the latest novelties in their company about weapons, that he should introduce that into his constituencies. So weapons played an important role. And again, the thing that we have to understand, that the massacres did not take place only in the city, and due to at the first phase of the massacres, due to the strong resistance put by the Armenians, the numbers were low. Had the Armenians were not armed, the numbers would have been higher. I do not want to enter into details here, whether it was 17, whether it was 30. Large sum of Armenians were killed, and the ratio, I argue, is 20 to 1. All right? Did Armenians kill? Yes, they did kill Muslims who were attacking on them, or the mob who were attacking them. They did kill. And that killing kind of creates a cycle of additional violence. It's true that they are killing us. So it's prophecies, now materializing.
Question from Arzu Aksak, and I apologize for anyone's name that I mispronounce. Have you come across information in your research as to whether the governor of Adana and the Armenian patriarch, attempted to cooperate to try to prevent the massacres from happening?
As a matter of fact, when the massacres start, or there were rumors about the massacres, the first day when Armenians closed their shops, fearing that massacres would start, and when the Muslims see that the Armenians are closing their shop, they say, well, they're closing their shop because they're going to attack us. So kind of the imaginary fear that they start propagating. The Vali of Adana, Cevat Bey, was complicit, was inept, wasn't able to handle the whole situation. Unlike the Vali of Aleppo, Reshat Bey. For example, in Aleppo, the Vali was strict that no such events should take place in his province or in the city of Aleppo. Some argue that in the case of the city of Aleppo, Armenian and Muslim, Christian or Muslim businesses were intermingled, meaning there wasn't maybe a specific area where the Muslims had their own shops, like the Armenian ones in Adana. But there wasn't any serious measures that had taken place by the Vali. And regardless if you were complicit or not, it is your responsibility as the governor to ensure the safety of your own citizens. If you fail to do that, you are responsible for it, and you should be punished as such, as it happened in the case of the massacres of Damascus, either Damascus or Lebanon, I think it's Damascus, where the Vali was received the death sentence. He was hanged due to, of course, European intervention and humanitarian intervention.
Can you address the role, this is from Keith David Wattenpaugh, address the role of the Armenian Red Cross Society and Zabal Yasayan's thought on the meaning of the Adana massacres as she expressed in her writings?
Of course, Keith, you've written also about this. Zabal Yasayan wrote one of the most horrifying, literally book about the Adana massacres. She went there as part of the aid group of the Red Cross. And of course, she was also very alert about the way in which humanitarian aid was being given by Europeans. She was against it. She was against kind of this missionary process. Specifically, she confronted the Vali, as you know, about putting the Armenians in Jamal Pasha's orphanage, and she saw kind of within these framework of the orphanages that the Germans are opening orphanage, Germans, the French, etc., kind of national humiliation for Armenians, or the idea that they're not able to take care of their own people. So it was a major blow to the Armenians, the Adana massacre, that shook their foundation, that shook their confidence in the Young Turks, because the Young Turks were not able to achieve justice. Were they reluctant, or were they unable? So this is another question that I try to answer in the book.
Can you talk a little bit about, you've already spoken a little bit about the importance of rumor in this, at a time, obviously before you could spread rumors and what we might now call conspiracy theories by social media. How were these rumors spread? Was it strictly word of mouth, or were they also transmitted through means of mass communication that were available at the time?
So the rumors were first spread through mouth, but they also were spread through telegraphs, and hence the telegram, hence the cables played an important role, sending rumors that the sub-governor has heard about rumors. He would immediately send to the center, meaning the Vali of Adana, saying that we heard these rumors and people are really but the key player of these rumors was going to be the Itidal newspaper, which now really put the rumors on paper. And whenever people see things written, they start believing in it much more than what than the ones in which it was only in the air.
Question from Anna Ohanyan: were there any groups that cut across ethno-religious lines beyond the personal relations between communal elites? How was the uneasy coexistence which Uğur described made possible, and how was it managed? As either of you can address this.
Let me see, where is your question? Of course, in a place, such compact place such as the city of Adana, there is a lot of intermingling going on, a lot of neighbors talking to each other. But really what happens psychologically when suddenly things break, when suddenly things go out of control, then you have kind of the intensification of tensions, immediately solidification of boundaries. Also, Muslim families, I should say, that they did save Armenians too during the during the massacres. So I do not represent, kind of, you have the evil side, you have the good side, you have, it's much more complex than this versus that. So there were a lot of relations, business relations, etc. But we have also to understand to what extent, another question, to what extent did the local population play a role in the massacres? We know about the migrant workers, we know about the irregulars, we know about people coming from the villages, we know about seasonal migrant workers playing a role. To what extent really the local population, the neighbors, play an important role in the massacres? I don't know about
that. From John Balosian, what role did the Catholicosate play at the time, and what is your takeaway from Zakaria Bezdigian and his writings?
Yeah, of course, Zakaria Bezdigian presents an important source actually for the documents pertaining to the Catholicos. Since the beginning of the revolution, since even prior to the revolution, the Catholicosate has been, this is the Catholicosate of Cilicia, okay? The Sahak, the first, was in bad shape in terms of administrating his flock, in terms of the irregularities that were happening, in terms of depredation suffered by his community, but also after the Young Turk Revolution, when Armenians were happy about the new beginning. We tend to see the Young Turk Revolution from the perspective of the urban places. Istanbul, Adana, Van, everyone is hugging each other. But things haven't changed actually in the villages, in the periphery. The same people remain in the periphery, those who were now unhappy about the situation. Situation in other places haven't changed even. Some of the members of the Ancien regime jumped on the bandwagon of the Young Turks now, immediately trying to call themselves Young Turks. So he was sending letters after letters to the Armenian Patriarchate of Istanbul and to the Bishop Musher, saying that the situation in Kozan, for example, is not good. We have the Tulan farm conflict, we have major tensions in the region, and nothing is being done by the local government. And so when these letters are being sent to the capital, the Young Turks say that these are exaggerations and falsifications. I mentioned this in my first book. Hence, if these are falsifications and exaggerations, how do you explain what happened in Adana immediately after these complaints and intensifications? So one thing we have to understand, that massacres do not happen in a vacuum. There is a precipitation of ethnic tensions that kind of exist, but under the surface. But what happens immediately when there's a trigger and a breakthrough, kind of?
There was a question from someone, and I'm sorry I can't find it now, but it was asking you to say more about the role of the CUP, and I'm going to understand that to mean, was the role of the CUP as a national entity the same as the role of the CUP on a local level? And then what did the CUP do in the aftermath of the massacres?
Of course, this is a vexing question itself, the role of CUP. There are two points two critical points that we have to think about the role of the Central CUP. One of them is that immediately when the massacre starts, the advisor of the Internal Ministry, or the Undersecretary of the Internal Ministry, Adil Bey, sends a telegram to the Valley of Adana when he receives a letter that things are out of control here. He immediately sends a telegram saying that make sure to preserve law and order and make sure to protect the foreign institutions and churches, right? So from Armenian perspective of the time, they thought this as a euphemistic approach, protect the foreigners and the consulars and missions, but kill Armenians. So here's the extent to how do you explain this? Do you see this as an order to kill? Or do you see as this is a genuine order to protect the foreigners at a time in which the ships are docking in Mersin, waiting for kind of any order to enter to Adana as part of humanitarian intervention? This is one. If you ask me, I don't see this as an order to kill, but we can disagree about that. The second one is why, when 3 battalions were sent to Adana by the CUP in order to, from Rumelia, from the west, to Adana by the CUP in order to preserve law and order in the city, why they do take part in the second wave of massacres. Did they come by orders? Did they come with orders to kill Armenians? Or did they suddenly erupt based on false rumors that Armenians started revolting again? Now, the first government version of this was that they reacted when Armenians shot on them from the Armenian neighborhood. Of course, when the investigation commission comes and examines everything with Hagop Babigyan, etc., they argue that it was impossible to shoot the camp where the 2 or 3 battalions were camped from the Armenian quarters because there was a block there. There was a hill there. It was impossible. So I provide different points of view regarding the second, the complicity of the troops. I provide different points of view. Some would say that they came with preconceived notions that Armenians were uprising. Others would say that Muslims or people of ancien regime shot on the camp in order to implicate Armenians. Others would say they just took part in the massacres due to rumors that Armenians had attacked and killed some of the soldiers. But what we know is that the majority of the soldiers did take part in the second massacres, and specifically in looting the Armenian properties or whatever left from the Armenian properties.
Bedross, thank you. And Uğur, thank you also, of course, for your comments and questions and for the discussion. Do either of you have any final words before I just make a couple of brief announcements? Or Uğur, your cat, would your cat like the opportunity to say anything? No. Okay.
Any opportunity to be in the camera, basically.
So there are 2 upcoming SAS and Nasser collaborative programs in the next several weeks. I wanted to mention next Wednesday, May 11th at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, Dr. Carol Bertram will give a talk entitled Personalizing the Map of Homeland, which draws on her newly published book, A House in the Homeland. This is a webinar, Nasser and SAS webinar. And on Thursday, June 2nd at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, another webinar, SAS and Nasser, Pamela Steiner, Collective Trauma and the Armenian Genocide, Armenian, Turkish, and Azerbaijani Relations since 1839. We hope you can join us for those, and we thank you for joining us for this excellent presentation today. And I'm sure everyone joins with me in congratulating Bedross on the publication of this important book. And
thank you, Mark. Thank you, everyone who attended. Thank you, Uğur.
We look forward to the next one. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.